Hey, what's good? Max Charlebois here, aka Miss the Part, and welcome back to a brand new series where we turn imagination into reality. Join me as we dive deep into the creative realm and break down one of my all-time favorite what-if scenarios, or if I had written scenarios, where unraveling the web of possibility in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4. This is my version of Spider-Man 4. So buckle up because we're about to swing into the unfolding story and explore this alternate reality in brand new depth. Peter was still coping with the effects of the loss of his best friend, Harry Osborn, and the result effect of this fight being televised worldwide. The catastrophe, the gore, the hate, the pity. This led to the catastrophe effects of riots and protests, some taking Spider-Man's side, others against him. In this whirlwind of madness, Mary Jane was by his side. Peter had gotten accepted to work for Dr. Curtis Connors, who was under the new management at Oscorp by Roderick Kingsley. Being up close to Oscorp made his healing process retrogressive. Every step he took forward, he took 3 steps back. Being around the company reminded him of what had happened to the family that owned the business. Regardless of the turmoil, Peter was determined to try and protect the city, even though half of it was clamoring for his arrest. The death of Harry had tainted him. It had left its mark like a witch during haunting season. His relationship with Mary Jane suffered the strain. They had tried to go on dates to salvage the situation, but it mostly always ended the same. Peter, claustrophobic, nervous, and foaming at the end of the day. He tried to prove himself by stopping an armed man, but this never went his way. The armed man fired his gun. Spider-Man dodged it on the street, and it hit a civilian, who was later identified by a character that I wrote as Richard Kingsley's brother. Prior to this, he had stumbled on the abandoned basement filled with Green Goblin's machinery. Roderick, he injected himself with the Goblin serum, which he had amplified to become more vigorous and stronger. Spider-Man found out that the armed man was Dennis, who he thought he killed in vengeance for his uncle's demise. Dennis was almost killed again. This and many more mistakes, coupled with his repetitive behavior of fleeing, pushed the police to beg him to appear for a court hearing. Eventually, Peter submitted himself to the court order to appear before it, which he was later pronounced not guilty by a judge whom he had saved in the train scene in Spider-Man 2. Filled with rage from the murder of his brother, Roderick, who was now the Hobgoblin, hunted Spider-Man to kill him. After a series of brutal attempts, the last battle took place at the place where it all began, the underground basement of Oscorp, a secret chamber that Norman had owned previously. Peter managed to survive long enough to save Mary Jane, who had been captured by Hobgoblin. Roderick, whom had been injected the cure, which he and Dr. Connors had worked on. Peter Parker was eventually saved by the Lizard, Dr. Connors, who had tested out the serum on himself, from dying in the basement rigged to explode. The Spider-Verse is riddled with lots of interesting villains, characters, and plots, so why did I decide to go with this line? This is the main question that I've been getting. The ending battle of Spider-Man 3 was an emotional scene. Seeing Harry Osborn and how he sacrificed himself for Peter, even though they had not been on the best terms a few days ago, would have definitely affected the stability of any person. So it was only logical to bring to the spotlight the effects of this, how it messed with his mind, and how it affected his relationship with Mary Jane. Also, Mary Jane and Peter probably stayed together because they had a common thread other than love. The death of Harry, and that was why I really wanted to write that part instead of, disconnecting them. I wanted them to be brought together finally because the death of this hero. So they had to make their relationship work. Mary Jane could understand the emotional wreck that is Peter, and likewise, Peter could be grounded by Mary Jane. It would have been an injustice to attempt to serve this emotional plot in a bid for flamboyance or extra vibrance. Also, the reason I chose this path was in order to explore Spider-Man's more human and emotional side in the If I Had Written. In the previous parts of Spider-Man, he had been displayed to be more of an untouchable superhero. The closest he came to defeat was in Part 3 during the fight with Venom and Sandman. I wanted to probe this and further, so in this Part 4, I had to explore the depths of the pain Peter could go through, and that's why I really wanted to write this in. Like, what could we do to make the pain even more straining for Peter Parker? Peter had gone through a lot of emotional strain, even worse, physically. He had physical strains. The plot was designed to display his endurance and explore how long he could indeed last for until he either broke or got killed. Peter suffered terrible injuries, his badly bruised shoulder, the lacerations on his body, among with others. Emotionally, he was coming to terms with the fact that Harry was dead and Mary Jane was likely a target. The apex test of his strength was when he had to lift the heavy beams of the courtroom off of him, even with his badly injured and bleeding shoulder. Also, the incorporation of the court scene is to show the evidence concerning his good and perceived evil deeds. I decided to incorporate that scene as a silent nod to judgment and the subservice of every hero in the law. This means that I tried to show that every hero, regardless of the input and protection they give to society, they should abide by the laws, and doing so. Not only should one be above the law, not even superheroes. Hence, making Spider-Man in my If I Had Written to appear before the court is evidentially of my statement of equality before the law. Also, Peter needed someone other than Mary Jane and his fractured mind to tell him that he was not guilty. And as much as he tried to count how many people he had saved, he kept crumbling at the fact that his best friend had died because of him, and so did the civilian. Peter needed to hear the judge tell him if he was indeed a criminal or not. Hearing the judge pronounce his sentence as not guilty reminded him of who he was, what he did as a hero, and what he stood for. Peter needed a final chapter with his past. Peter was in a constant tango with his past, and in Part 3 he did not seem to close the lid fully on the ghosts of his past. This is why I felt in my version of Spider-Man 4 should seal the hole for good. Peter had been employed by Oscorp, the very company his best friend's dad owned. Dennis, who had allegedly killed his Uncle Ben and was in turn supposedly killed by him. All these factors are pointed at the difficulty for Peter to disentangle himself from his past life by running or evading. He needed to face it head on. Facing his past, which was indeed poetic, was for two reasons: to heal him or eventually break him, but the former occurred. I thought it was ironical in the first part of the Spider-Man trilogy. Peter hunted down Dennis, a man he assumed had killed his Uncle Ben. And he killed him, or so he thought. He did this as a vendetta, a plan to avenge his uncle's death. I thought it would have been ironic that in the fourth part, the same card would be dealt, but only this time against him. Due to Spider-Man's negligence, he dodged a bullet, which hit a bystander who turned out to be the brother of the person who had the serum injected into him. This set Roderick Kingsley on a path of revenge for his brother Richard. an acknowledgement of the deed Spider-Man had done to seek revenge. I initially stated that Peter's past had its reins around his throat like a horse rider. Bringing the Hobgoblin as a villain was a way of making Peter confront his past. He had too much emotions attached to the Goblin villain. It was first his best friend's dad, one of his father figures, then his best friend Harry. Every time Peter fought the Hobgoblin, he would have had fleeting memories of his best friend in the past events. Making him face the Hobgoblin was in order for him to let go of the forgiveness he had for himself concerning Harry's death, and a way for him confronting the past would make him finally accept what had happened to him and heal. When he finally faced Harry in the fractured memory after ignoring his voice for so long, his healing process began. I really wanted to write a scene where Peter finally visits the Osborn residence for help, and this scene was really an emotional thing to write, where Harry is talking to Peter through the mirror, and I thought it was just such a great thing, and we finally have him face that fractured mirror, and it was something that was really interesting. It really helped with the healing process as it began. Defeating the Hobgoblin would mean his supremacy over the reins of his past, and from the clutches it had on him. A lot of people would have grown bored of the Goblin villain arc or its story if they had actually went with this route. It would have been a villain for 2 parts, 1 and part 3. However, there was so much left after the death of both Norman and Harry Osborn. After they had died, they had a company and a lot of secret weapons and serums left. It would have been a disaster if it was not explained in what had happened to these hidden serums, the company, and its management. So it was proper to follow through with the management of Roderick Kingsley being the Hobgoblin, which is in tenement with the comics. The Goblin is one of the most interesting villains with a deep story, and it deserved more screen time. The width of the serum needed to be explored. It would have been almost comical for some random person to luckily stumble on the secret lair of the Green Goblin. It needed to be someone who was near obsessed and worked for the company. Hobgoblin was the perfect villain to match Spider-Man's growth and experience. As the series went on, the strength of the villain matched the experience of Peter. In the first part, Peter battled the Green Goblin. In the second part, he battled Dr. Octavius, which was more different in fighting style and technique than the Goblin. In part 3, he fought Sandman and then battled Venom, who were the apex predators, completely different from the other villains. In Spider-Man 4, I really wanted to make it be a villain that took it a step further, nudged it higher, and this was Hobgoblin. Hobgoblin offered this. Hobgoblin was faster, stronger, more agile, and fierce than the other goblins Peter encountered, and this was more taxing on his person and his mental ability. Defeating the Hobgoblin would confirm his apex hood, his strength, and his brilliance. A different approach I may have taken to test the prowess and endurance of Spider-Man would have been Dr. Curtis Connors, who became the Lizard, a villain at the end of the If I Had Written. Dr. Connors in his lizard form rescued Spider-Man from drowning and exploring it. However, a different approach would have been to make the Lizard come earlier, and instead of aiding Spider-Man, he would have fought him instead. This would have been a true battle. Would the Lizard have enough consciousness within himself to attack the Hobgoblin, knowing who was underneath and what he had done to his family? Or would he have been a brainless drone attacking everybody? A much darker route I would have taken would have been to actually kill had he performed the last heroic act of letting Mary Jane save Roderick instead of him. This would have been a conclusive chapter and a part for that variant, as he would have had rest eventually. However, the life lessons and stories would have been too tragic to grasp. So that being said, my fellow watchers, what did you think of this breakdown series? Me writing Spider-Man 4, what did you think of this personal take and why I chose some of the things within my storyline? I would love to hear your thoughts. But that being said, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn those notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. And if you guys would like to get featured on the channel, I would highly recommend that you comment about the storyline, ask questions, ask certain things, because you can get shoutouts just like these other people did within the story. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and have a fantastic day. Peace out.